St. Paul today refers to three of the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. These three virtues are pillars, are foundational for us to live as Catholics, as Christians. But St. Paul mentions them with some other words attached, which I think are very important for us as we think about how to live out the theological virtues in our own life. He says that there is work of faith, labor of love, and endurance and hope. Sometimes endurance and hope is translated to mean steadfast perseverance in hope. Work, labor, endurance, or perseverance, this makes it a little bit more difficult, right? To say that we always seek to live out faith, hope, and love, because attached to those gifts are work and labor and endurance. It's the good work that we have to do as Christians, as Catholics. It is a labor that we enter into, and it is endurance that we hope for. St. Paul is speaking to the Thessalonians at the beginning of his writings to them, and he's encouraging them in these three virtues because of the persecution that they're up against, because of the challenges of living the faith in the midst of a secular world. Perhaps that sounds familiar to us. The challenges that we're up against in persecution and the challenges of living the faith out well in the midst of secularism in our day. Work of faith, labor of love, endurance and hope. Well, we can see these lived out in the saints that are going before us in faith. And just over a week ago, on October 10th, something very profound happened here in the world and in the church. We had the first millennial who was declared a blessed, or who was beatified. Blessed Carlo Acutis was beatified in Assisi on October 10th, 2020. He was born only in 1991, so he was only 15 years old when he died of cancer. And just a few years later, his cause was opened for canonization. We have many millennials among us. And so this person who lived in our time and is a great example for us should not only inspire the millennials, but frankly inspire all of us of all ages that join together in faith today. Blessed Carlo, he was kind of a common kid by all rights and at first sight. He loved to play soccer, he loved to play video games. He in fact was buried in jeans and Nike tennis shoes and a pullover sports shirt. Little did they know then that he would be exhumed in his beatification to be honored, to be reverenced by the hundreds and thousands of people who would flood in to Assisi to see this young millennial that had been beatified. Blessed Carlo, I would propose, at a very young and in his young wisdom, learn to do the work of faith. The work of faith. Faith produces good works, as we know. Faith and works go hand in hand in our lives. Blessed Carlo once said, to care for those who once cared for us is one of the highest honors that we could have. So he lived out his work of faith by caring for others around him. And one of the groups of people that he was attracted to caring for were the elderly. He could often be found visiting someone who was sick, or the elderly who are lonely. Now think about this for just a second. A teenager who has all these things that they want to go and do with their friends and be involved in, and he's taking time out of his life to sit patiently with an elderly person who is lonely. This is a profound work of faith that he in his own life lived out very beautifully, and reminds us that one of the greatest honors that we could ever have is to care for another, especially one who has once cared for us. He also said at one point that all people are born as originals, but many die as photocopies. His faith led him to understand that he was made in the image and likeness of God, but he was uniquely made. While we're all made in that image and likeness, we're all uniquely made with different gifts and different talents. And he saw in his wisdom that over time, some people start swaying with the ways of the world. They kind of become part of the wind of culture, if you will. And they start to look like everybody else because they're following everybody else. But he realized that he was not a photocopy, he was an original. just like each one of us, and that he was to live out the gifts, the charisms that God gave him particularly to the full as a work of faith. Blessed Carlo said that sadness is looking at ourselves, happiness is looking towards God. Didn't he get this one right? Because any time that we're kind of turned into ourselves and consumed with our own lives and our own stuff, well, there's a great sadness that begins to creep into our lives, even somewhat of a loneliness in many cases. But when we have our eyes set on God in faith, well, then our lives are alive because they are doing what they're meant to do in faith. In the work of faith, they are living out the call to love God and love our neighbor. And this is what we would call a labor of love. It is what St. Paul refers to as the work of love or labor of love. Blessed Carlo lived out the labor of love by living the sacramental life. He was particularly known from a very young age, when he had moved with his family from England back to Milan, where his parents were from. And at a very young age, in the city of Milan, walking with his mother down the street to go to the grocery store, to go to school, every time there was a church, he begged his mom to take him into the church. He wanted to visit Jesus. Now, what was particularly beautiful about this is that Blessed Carlo was attracted to the Eucharist, even though his family was not a practicing Catholic family. His mother and father had separated. His mother, who was raising him, was not practicing in the faith. And yet he would beg her to go into the church and to visit his friend Jesus. And in that labor of love in visiting Jesus, he gained this beautiful Eucharistic heart. This Eucharistic heart that would then pour out love by his labors to those around him. He once said that the Eucharist is our highway to heaven. While that may seem like a simplistic view from a young boy of what the Eucharist and heaven are together, it's really a great truth that when we are grounded in the Eucharist, when our lives are Eucharistic, then we have a highway, if you will, to heaven, because we are grounded in God himself. And that Eucharistic God fortifies us so that we can be on the highway to heaven. If we get in front of the sun, he once said, we get suntans. But if we get in front of Jesus in the Eucharist, we become saints. He desired to be a saint from a very young age. And in fact, that gift of his draw to the Eucharist and to want to spend time with the Lord and to receive the Lord in the Eucharist would lead him to his first communion. At age 8, he would beg his mother to receive instruction, again, even though the family were not practicing Catholics. And his mother would agree. And from that day on, from the day he received his first communion, he rarely, if ever, missed, to their knowledge, a daily Mass. Now imagine an 8-year-old going to daily Mass, day in and day out, so attracted to the Eucharist. And that love of God would lead his own mother back to the church. And in fact, it would be that love of God in the Eucharist that would welcome many people in Carlos's life back to the truth of the Eucharist, body, blood, soul, and divinity, the summit and source of our Catholic lives. The more Eucharist we receive, the more we will become like Jesus, he said, so that on earth we will have a foretaste of the heaven that we're made for. Blessed Carlos would not only become this great gift of being united with the Eucharist, but he would realize that from time to time we fall short of living the labor of love that we're made for. And so he believed in the sacrament of confession. He once said our soul is like a hot air balloon. If by chance there is a mortal sin in our soul, the soul falls to the ground. But confession is like the fire underneath the balloon, enabling the soul to rise up again. It is important, he said, that we go to confession often. In fact, his mother would testify after his death that it was regular for him to go at least once a week. Now imagine his pure and beautiful soul. What could he possibly have that he needed to confess? And yet he understood that at any time that there was sin on his soul, that it was blocking him from living the labor of love that he was made for. It was forcing him to turn into self instead of turn out to God and to others. And so he always wanted to have a pure soul so that he could love God and love his neighbor with all his might. This would lead him to live out the charisms of his life so beautifully. And one of the great gifts that God gave him was an intellect. And he was given the gift of being able to do computer programming, and thus, at one point, realized that a lot of people didn't go to Mass, not just daily, but even weekly. And he thought to himself, why is that? This is the greatest gift that you could possibly be given on earth, next to baptism, is the Holy Eucharist. And so he began to research more about the Eucharist, and he found Eucharistic miracles, and he was fascinated by the Eucharistic miracles over 2,000 years of Christianity. So fascinated that he began to study and learn, and he thought to himself, now everybody should know about these miracles, and so he logged them. Not just some of them, but all proven Eucharistic miracles for 2,000 years. And he put them onto one website, which to this day is a great gift and will be for all now of eternity to all the world. You can look it up, just Google Blessed Carlo Eucharistic Miracles, and you'll see his beautiful work. It's just a decade or so old. And there it's not only well done kind of with the information, but creatively draws you in with pictures and with color to see the beauty of the color that God gives our lives through the Eucharist. He also believed that we should endure in hope, that is, have steadfast perseverance and hope. Blessed Carlo said our aim has to be the infinite and not the finite. The infinite is our homeland. We have always been expected in heaven. Wow, when I read that the first time, it just kind of gave me chills. We've always been expected in heaven. He didn't say some are expected there. He said we, all of us, are expected by God to join Him for all eternity. What a beautiful hope that is. Not a hope of the world, not a fleeting or flighting hope that we sometimes get caught up in a worldly sense. No, it's a hope that is eternal. Blessed Carlo was grounded in that hope. In fact, he kind of would try to move away from things of the world that could kind of pull him in. For example, he loved video games because he loved technology. But he realized out of his wisdom of his youth that if he spent too much time there, that could be trouble for him. And so out of temperance, he would allow himself only 1 hour a week to play video games with his friends. And the rest of the time, when his friends wanted to play video games, he would encourage them to do other things that would help build up their souls, their lives. He also was simple in his living. He didn't have a lot of material things, even though his mother would say, Carlo, you've been wearing those shoes for such a long time, let's get you some new shoes. Or you can have 2 or 3 pairs of shoes, Carlo. And he would say, no, mother, let's spend the money and give it to the poor. Let's give somebody that needs shoes more than I the shoes today. He was simple. He could care less what he dressed like. He could care less what other people owned or had. He was this great example of having God inscribed on his soul. That is the indelible mark that we are all given in baptism and confirmation. Today in our gospel, we hear that kind of inscription being laid out. Either there's a world inscribed on our hearts, our minds, our souls, that is Caesar, or God is inscribed in our hearts, our souls, our minds. And Jesus says, give to God what belongs to God. What is he saying to us is that we've all been given this same indelible mark through our baptism and confirmation that Blessed Carlo was given. And we all get the chance day in and day out, moment by moment, to live out the truth of the work of faith, the labor of love, and the endurance and hope that we have been given by God himself as he has marked us for all eternity. Whose image is etched on our hearts, our minds, our souls this day, we might ask? Is it an image of something of Caesar, something of the world? Are we consumed with getting ahead or the next step in my career or being at the top of this or that? Am I consumed with what I gather or put in my bank account or the next car, the next house? Well, all these things are fine and good. Nothing can be taken of those things to the grave with us. And none of them will help us in all eternity unless they're grounded in God. And so, Blessed Carlo, he understood this so beautifully in his own life, that we are made for more. We're made to be saints. The infinite is our homeland. We have always been expected in heaven. Who's inscribed on your heart this day? And is it an inscription that leads us to heaven for all eternity to become saints ourselves?